Bienvenidos, señoras y señores, to another Bleedlos podcast YouTube short. And on this YouTube short, we're going to tackle a few topics. But first, we're going to start off with MLB Network doing these lists that they've been putting out. And it looks like they're going by position. So the first list that we want to discuss is the top 10 catchers in Major League Baseball. And before the list was revealed, Babyface had put through our Twitter page, had asked you guys, what number do you think Will Smith was going to come in? Because it was expected that clearly Will Smith was going to be on this list of top 10 catchers. And the majority of the responses that I saw on there were people were expecting Will Smith to come in at number 3 or number 4. That's what you saw, right, Babyface?
Yeah, 3 or 4, middle of the line. Saw one person say like number 1, but they're about 3, 4, 5, right in there.
Okay, so the list was finally revealed, and we have it here. And I was very surprised and happy to see that Will Smith came at number 2. Can you put up the list, Babyface, for those of you who are not familiar with the list? JT Realmuto of the Phillies came in at number 1. And as you can see, there's the rest of the list. Now, I don't have a problem with any of this, to tell you the truth. I don't know if this list speaks more about the state of catching in Major League Baseball, or maybe just how good Will Smith is, and maybe we take Will Smith for granted. Babyface, what were your initial response? I mean, when you saw JT Realmuto as number 1, were you upset that he beat out Will Smith?
No, not really. I mean, we were kind of talking before off here. Like, I mean, JT Realmuto has been doing this now for a number of years, right? He's kind of been the catcher, right? He's been the guy, right? When you talk about catching, that's who they're always talking about. And Will Smith coming at 2, I was like, okay, Will Smith at 2, that's pretty good, right? I personally think Realmuto and Smith are probably maybe even Smith being a little bit better. Like I said, I think Realmuto, the recognition, the tenure, the kind of the resume, I think he's at the top of that list right now. But I think Will Smith is just as good or even better as the best catcher in baseball. And I think if he goes out and he has a good season this year, all-star team, I think you'll see him at the top of that list next season.
You know what I find really interesting, where I don't know if you heard these rumors towards when the season ended and it was just the beginning of the offseason, these rumors that catching was a position of strength for the Dodgers. So because catching was a position of strength, that maybe the Dodgers should consider trading Will Smith in order to fill some of their gaps. Now, the funny thing is we keep hearing about Diego Cartaya. Diego Cartaya, I still think is a ways away. The Dodgers, the guy who they drafted last year, Dalton Rushing, seems to be quickly moving up the minor league ranks. So they have Austin Barnes as their backup. I know this is going to sound weird, but Will Smith coming in at number 2 on this list, is Will Smith underappreciated, Babyface?
I mean, I don't think he is. I mean, all that talk has kind of been just outsiders, right? Outside noise. I don't think it's something that's coming from internally that the Dodgers want to trade Will Smith or they're looking to move Will Smith. I mean, I think they know what they have in Will Smith, and they know he should have been an all-star, last year and probably even the year before. So they know what they got in Will Smith, and that is the interesting part. We're like, what, you got the Dodgers number 1 prospect. What is he, like number 2 or number 3 in all of baseball, right? Diego Cartaya, right? It is interesting. What are you going to do when he's knocking at the door, right, to get to the show? I mean, I still don't think it's going to be this year. Maybe next year he might get a call up. So he's, a few years away. So maybe by that time, Will Smith is heading towards free agency, and you don't know what happens in free agency.
So this is what I find interesting, was when Will Smith came up, he got called up before Kiebert, right? And before you guys all start getting mad at me, I'm not saying that Keibert is Diego Cartaya, and I'm not even saying that people were talking about Keibert Ruiz the same way they're talking about Diego Cartaya. But we kept hearing the name Keibert Ruiz, that it looked like it was going to be Keibert Ruiz was going to be the Dodgers catcher of the future, and that Will Smith was really going to be kind of a stopgap. And it seemed that Will Smith's strength coming up into the major leagues was his defense. I think it's the exact opposite now. I think Will Smith's strength is his offense, and the defense is still catching up to his offense, which I think is a pleasant surprise, and I don't think anybody was expecting that. Do you see that any differently, Babyface?
No, I mean, yeah, I think when he came up, and he started, hitting home runs and hitting bombs, whoa, this is Will Smith. This like the real Will Smith. This we're gonna and it continued, and we've seen that. He hits the home runs. He's pretty clutch. He's come up with some big hits for the Dodgers. So he has that, and he's solid behind the plate. So he is, like you said, he is one of the top catchers. And getting back to Keibert, I remember Keibert I think he was their number one prospect at a time,
Yeah.
right? And they were kind of just they didn't know what to do with him either. Like they didn't know we don't really have room for him up on the big league club. What do we do? And they ended up moving him.
Well, I mean, and I kept hearing the opposite with Keibert, right? It was the bat that they all loved with Keibert. They just didn't trust him behind the plate, calling a game, his defense, right?
Yeah.
And, he was with the Nationals last year. I didn't hear much about Keibert. And once again, everybody that tells me trust Friedman, so far, I mean, there are some glaring exceptions, but so far he seems to have traded away the right prospects. For every time we hear, oh, he traded them away, people will bring up O'Neal Cruz. People will bring up Alvarez from the Astros, for the Fields trade. So there have been some times where I feel Friedman has kind of missed, but I think he's batting over 300 so far in terms of prospects. I'm curious to see, as you say, I agree with you. I don't think we're going to see Cartaya this year. Maybe next year. I'm curious to see if we're going to see a situation like, remember when Mike Piazza was coming up and Mike Scioscia was still the Dodgers catcher? Now, mind you, Scioscia was older by the time Piazza was coming up, so you're not really going to have that situation here because Will Smith is still very young. So it is going to be, I guess it's a good problem to have, right? If Will Smith is producing and then Cartaya does move up the different levels of the minor leagues and is successful, and he's showing, hey, this guy's the real thing, and you got Dalton Rushing on his heels. I mean, maybe catching is a position of strength for the Dodgers, and you will be able to flip one of them over because there's only so many positions. Unless, have you heard this at all, Babyface? Could we see Diego Cartaya change positions?
I mean, being with the Dodgers, right? That's definitely an option. Like, but where do you see Diego playing? Like, where else? Like, could he be a third baseman? I mean, a position that they'll say, like, well, just put him out in left field, right? Like, because that's kind of like the safest place to put somebody, right, in left field. I mean, do they try that? I mean, first base, you got Freeman. So there's really not a lot of spots that you could put Cartaya at, besides catching. So, same thing with Dalton Rushing. We heard, we've heard that too. Like, well, maybe do they move him, third base or something else, something like that. So, like I said, it's one of those good problems to have.
It's a good problem to have, and it's still a ways away. I get it. So before I start getting the comments, hey, it's like, all I'm saying, I know you guys hate hypotheticals, but if everyone is what they say about Cartaya is true and he's knocking on the door and he's going to be coming up, the Dodgers are going to have to make a decision because, all right, are you going to have Will Smith and Cartaya as your two catchers? Then what happens to Austin Barnes? If Dalton Rushing turns out to be what everybody thinks he is, What are you going to do with Dalton rushing? So it's all good problems to have. I do find it interesting that we're already talking about changing positions. And the only reason why we bring that up is because this is what the Dodgers are doing in the minor leagues. They're making players play multiple positions. Michael Busch has been playing in the infield and he's been playing in the outfield. Miguel Vargas, he was going to be the third baseman. You saw him playing first base. They had him out in the outfield. And now all of a sudden, Friedman is saying that Miguel Vargas is going to play second base. So as much as everyone's going to sit there and say, oh, you guys and your crazy hypotheticals, I don't think it's that outlandish that we already start talking about these guys playing multiple positions, because this is what the Dodgers teach in the minor leagues. This is what they want. They want that versatility. They like people that can play multiple positions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was surprised with Vargas, like at second, because what we had seen was third base, right? He was playing a little bit of left field. And then I remember last season, towards the end of the year, when he was called up before the playoffs, he was out there at second base, working on second base. So, it makes sense now what Friedman has said, like that's where he's going to see some time as well this season.
Which makes me wonder then what's going to happen with Michael Busch. Is Michael Busch now blocked? Is Michael Busch going to be a trade chip? I mean, it's really interesting. This season for me is going to be interesting in many ways, not only about what's going on in the field, but what's going on with these guys. Like, which one of these young guys is going to deliver? Which one is going to end up being everything that we thought they were going to be? So I want to segue into Major League Baseball put out another list, and this one is a little more controversial, and this one I think really pissed off Babyface. So MLB Network, put out a list of the top 10 pitchers in Major League Baseball. And obviously when you look at the list, you were looking to see where Julio is. For those of you who listen to the show, who watch the show, who are loyal listeners, you guys know we on this show are big Julio Urías fans. We're stands for Julio. So we look for Julio's name, and there you have it. You have Julio. You want to put up the list, Babyface? So for those of you who haven't seen the list yet, number 10, just go straight to the bottom of the list, and you will find Julio Urías. So I want to look at this list, and look, everybody on this list is a really good pitcher. Right off the top of the list, for me, the thing that stands out, Carlos Rodon at number 3. So you're putting Carlos Rodon ahead of Julio Urías, who has won the last 2 years the Warren Spahn Award, which is an award specifically given to left-handers. Who's won that award? Julio has. So you're going to put Carlos at number 3. Okay, not only are you putting Carlos at number 3, but you're going to put number 7, Max Fried, ahead of Julio. So that to me was immediately what stood out. Number 1 was surprising to me was Corbin Burnes. I would put Corbin Burnes in the top 10. I don't know if I'm putting Corbin Burnes at number 1. To me, this list is very interesting, Babyface. What were your initial thoughts when you saw this list?
Well, I mean, when I saw it, I just saw Julio at 10, and then I couldn't really look at it anymore, right? It's like, come on, really, Julio? I mean, and just you said it, right? Julio's won the Warren Spahn Award 2 years in a row. That's the best left-handed pitcher in the game, right? And you got 2 left-handers in front of him. So to start, Julio's got to be in front of those guys, right?
Right.
I mean, and then you got Burnes, right? Verlander, Rodon, Scherzer. Scherzer hasn't been the same guy for like the last 2 years. So Scherzer shouldn't even be 4. I mean, I don't even know if he should be in the list, right? So Alcantara, okay, I'll give him that. If they wanted to go, okay, this guy won the Cy Young last year, let's put him at number 1, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of understand that because he won the Cy Young, right? So they put him. But, if you do that, Julio's got to be like number 3, right? So Verlander won Cy Young in the American League, right? So he has to be like, Julio has to be at least top 3 on this list if you rework it, right? I mean, Jacob deGrom being on there. There was another we'll get into some of the other people that were that were making their list, but they have DeGrom on there, and they always say this: Jacob DeGrom when healthy. This is top 10 right now. If DeGrom hasn't been healthy last year or the year before, why is he on the list? Right? That doesn't make any sense. It's right now, and DeGrom when healthy, okay, yes, he's one of the top pitchers, but he hasn't been pitching. He hasn't been healthy, so how's he on the list?
Yeah, no, one of the things, look, everybody that's on this list to me is a good pitcher. Okay? I think they made the right these there isn't anybody on this list that when I look at this list, I don't sit there and go, "Oh, they left off so and so," right? Uh, the thing that's really interesting to me with Julio, and we've talked about this before when we had our Cy Young conversation. I think what hurts Julio a lot when it comes to these conversations is how the Dodgers use him. The Dodgers limit his innings, and because they limit his innings. He's not going to be, he always is going to lose out to somebody like Alcantara, who throws a lot of innings, right? You see, Verlander is a guy who throws a lot of innings. But what's interesting is what you said. There's a lot of pitchers on that list that get hurt and have gotten hurt repeatedly. And I feel like maybe they're on that list because of reputation and not necessarily what has happened. So I think one of the things that Julio doesn't get enough credit for, and when we had friend of the show, Rocks, on the show, he talked about it, and that's Julio's durability, especially during these last couple of years. Julio is a guy that the Dodgers have been able to depend on to go out there and take the mound. Like, if you're sitting here thinking, who do you need to sign if you're the Dodgers, re-sign? Who you're going to throw money at, I would feel more comfortable throwing money at Julio than I would at Walker Buehler. Walker Buehler now has 2 Tommy Johns under his. Like, I think, and Julio is still young. Julio is still 20. He's only 24 years old. So I mean, look, his ERA has been really good the last 2 years. So the criteria of what they use to come up with this list, I'm not familiar with. Now, you saw the program, Babyface, so I want you to relay to our audience, for those of you who didn't see it, what were some of the comments that they were saying? What did you see on this program?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? They have the shredder, right? I mean, I don't think we know who the shredder is, right? This is the MLB Network, but they usually have people there that they're ranking them, the pitchers as well. They had Mike Petrillo, right? Sarah Langs, and some other guy. I forgot his name, right? And and I respect those guys, right? They know their baseball, right? But they didn't even have Julio on the list. He didn't even make their top 10. So that to me is like, really, like, it's like, how are you not going to have Julio in your top 10 list, right? Another guy, the pitching ninja, right? We know who the pitching ninja is, right? We've seen his videos on, he loves the junk, right? He loves all that filth that these pitchers like Corbin Burns are throwing, right? With all the movement and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. He didn't have him on the list in his top 10 either. And he I saw a clip where he was talking to Brian Kinney, right, from MLB Network, right? And Kenny was asking him. So he was actually asking about some of the people that he left off, and you mentioned like on this is on Pitching Ninja's list. No Nelson Cortez, no Max Scherzer, and he's like, yeah, it was tough. I left these guys off. Not one mention of Julio. It's like, do you guys even like? To me, it's like, do you guys even watch baseball past 9:00 in New York now? Like, it's like, if that's what's happening, like, is it simply because he pitches in LA? Anything after 9 p.m. in New York, they're not watching, like, and they have no idea who Julio is. Like, I don't get it.
Well, here's the thing that I think we've had this conversation throughout many episodes with some of our guests, and that's how baseball has become very regionalized. And I'll be guilty of this, right? Because all I care about, all I focus on is the Dodgers. The problem that I have with people that cover baseball on a national perspective is I think it's almost impossible to cover everyone in Major League Baseball equally. There's just not enough time. There's no way that you can sit here and watch every inning of every game every day to get a true understanding. I think that's why you rely on these beat writers, the guys who cover those teams. The national guys rely, hey, what do you know about this guy? What can you give me? What were you going to say, Babyface?
Well, I don't watch. All I watch is Dodger games, pretty much, right? But I know who these other guys are, right? I know who DeGrom is and Alcantara. Like I've seen them pitch. I know they're filthy, right? Like
yeah.
They don't have to watch every single Dodger game. They don't have to watch it. They can see and turn on and see, and even the next day watch the highlights and be like, oh, this guy dominated, these guys for 5-6 innings, whatever, right? They should know who Julio is, right? I mean, but it to me, it seems like they have no idea who Julio is.
Right. But again, I put that on the Dodgers. I don't think the Dodgers have done a very good job of marketing Julio. Every time when you look at that Dodgers pitching staff, who are you talking about before you get to Julio? It's either Kershaw or Walker Buehler, right? Julio is the third guy that you're going to talk about in that pitching staff, right? So because the Dodgers do that, because the Dodgers treat their own pitcher like that, I think that cues these national guys to be like, well, if the Dodgers only think of him as a number 3 starter, why should I think of him as a number 1 or a number 2? Like, I think the Dodgers have done Julio a disservice, especially what they did the year before in the playoffs, the way that they used an opener with him on that game. I think people, even though there were a lot of people in baseball who questioned that, who said, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing that to Julio? I don't know how many people are really looking into deeply and going, wait, they shouldn't have done that to Julio. I think they look at it as like, oh, they do that to Julio because he's a guy who can't go deep in games. Well, we don't know that because the Dodgers never allow him to go deep into games. They have a short leash on him.
Yeah, I mean, but that argument, I get it. But that is kind of the game now, right? Like, of these guys, who are the guys that actually go deep into games? Verlander, probably, right? Alcantara.
Yeah.
Shohei's limited to like 6 innings, right? Fried probably goes about the same, right? DeGrom, about the same. Rodon, about the same. All these guys go about 6 innings, and that's it. That's the game. That's the game now. Like, yes, you want a guy to be old school and go 8, 9 innings complete a game. I'd love to see that, right? I'd love to see Julio do that, but that's not the game that unfortunately we're seeing, and that we have to understand that is not the game today anymore. You have these rare breeds like Alcantara that will hey, give me the ball, I'm going out there for 9, right? Yeah. And it's great to see that because there's still a couple guys like that, but unfortunately, that isn't the game today, and this is what it boils down to. Not even here, like we've had, like Max Muncy when he said, like, oh yeah, he can give us. We know he's going to give us 5 or 6. It's like 5 or 6. Like, shouldn't that be like 7 or 8, right? But that's not how these guys think anymore. It's like, give me 5 innings, we're good. That was a good start.
Yeah, and look, the East Coast bias argument has been used for many years, okay? And I don't know if there's any truth to that in this particular list, only because Carlos Rodon pitched for the Giants last year, so he was on the West Coast. So how is it that the writers were able to see enough games of Carlos to put him at number 3?
Because he's a Yankee now.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Is the East Coast bias now because he's a Yankee, that's why they put him at number 3? Because of the contract that he signed, is that why they put him up to 3? That's why I don't understand the criteria, because you just mentioned the panelists that they had on MLB Network. None of them had Julio on there. So if they didn't have Julio on their list, how did Julio even get to number 10? It's just... Look, we had one of the comments on our Twitter, and for those of you who aren't following us yet on Twitter, please go ahead and do so. You can follow us at Dodgers Beat. You can follow me at El Mero Doyer. You can follow the Bleed Lows podcast page on Twitter. Engage with us. We love to hear your thoughts. This is how we get your guys' feedback. that we had one of our listeners make the comment of like, yeah, everybody doesn't appreciate Julio now, but the minute he becomes a free agent, they're going to be throwing a lot of money to get him because they're going to want a guy who, as I said, up until this point, he had 1 year, he had that surgery. I mean, that issue with his shoulder, but since then he's been pretty durable, knock on wood. So we'll see. But I just, the criteria for this list baffles me. But for me, the names were right on the list. The order is something that I think we're always going to debate. But the two things that stood out to me immediately were Max Fried and Carlos Rodon are ahead of Julio, and yet Julio's won the award for best lefty the last 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting, right? If what we've been saying, we hope it doesn't happen, but if Julio leaves, right, and he ends up on the Mets, on the Yankees, is he going to be up there next year, top three?
If that happens, then I think it proves the theory there that the East Coast bias is real, and that's always going to hurt somebody. Now, obviously, you're going to have to basically be like Kershaw to break through that. You have to be so damn good that no one can ignore you. But again, I feel the Dodgers have done a great job promoting Kershaw. I don't feel they promoted Julio the same way they promoted Kershaw. Hopefully that changes because now going into this season, to me, Julio is clearly their number one. So going into opening day, I expect Julio to be the opening day starter. Let's see what they do. Any last thoughts before we move on to our final topic, Babyface?
No, just
You're still pissed, right?
yeah. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me, and we'll see what Julio brings this year.
Well, we want to wrap things up here. I know I said we're not going to talk about Trevor Bauer anymore, but Stan Kasten finally talked about Trevor Bauer. And I found his comments to be very, very interesting because I feel like Stan Kasten basically said a lot of nothing. So I want to see if you got this same vibe, Babyface. But basically, for those of you who aren't familiar, he was asked about the Trevor Bauer decision of actually releasing him. And Stan Kasten said the decision was unanimous and he feels good about the decision. He feels he made the right decision. That was the extent of what Stan Kasten said. After that, I feel like he just repeated himself saying the same thing, was that he felt they made the right decision and he feels good about it. What was interesting to me was one of the reporters asked him, well, Trevor Bauer said he met with you guys. He met with the top brass in Arizona, and the top brass has told him, hey, we want you to pitch for us next year. And then January 6th comes and he gets released. So at this point, for me, and there's a quote in the story in the LA Times where Stan Kasten says, I don't comment on conversations that were meant to be private. For me, what that meant is he's so pissed that Trevor Bauer put that out there and that he now has to talk about this. And this is the accountability that I feel is not happening. There's no transparency here. And it's like not once did neither Friedman nor Kasten acknowledge maybe it was a mistake signing this guy. Now, saying that, I don't want to sit there because it absolves Bauer, because Bauer was the one who did this to himself. If Bauer would have just focused on pitching and doing his thing, we wouldn't be in this mess, right? So this is not absolving Bauer of any culpability in this situation. But the fact that neither Friedman nor Kasten acknowledged the role that, hey, this stuff was already out there about this guy. Maybe it was our bad. We didn't do our due diligence, and that's what happened. The fact that Kasten refused to name who were the people who decided this, because he said it was unanimous. So who is that? Is that the owners? Is it you and Friedman and the owner? Was it just you and Friedman? Is that who's unanimous? There was still a lot that wasn't answered. There wasn't much transparency. To me, what it really came off as was Caston is pissed that he has to talk about this. And you and I, on previous YouTube shorts, you can go back and watch it. Babyface and I both talked about this when we heard that Trevor Bauer said, hey, the Dodgers said they wanted me pitching for them next year. Babyface said, hey, that could be true, but Bauer also could be leaving out, look, we want you to pitch for us, but the owner doesn't want this to happen. So what were your thoughts on Caston finally addressing the Trevor Bauer situation?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of just like you said, a lot of fluffiness of nothing really, right? Like it was just kind of like, here we are, we're making a statement about Bauer, we're finally speaking, but we're not going to say anything, right? Like they didn't say, who made that decision. They said, I think he said something like they took the time, the 2 weeks to get the information and I guess to talk. He said something like talk to people, right? Like to
Yeah.
So was he talking to like? Was it getting player feedback? Was it just ownership? Was it front office? Was it a general consensus of the whole Dodgers organization? Hey, how do you feel if this guy pitches for the organization? Like, I mean, we don't know. I mean, obviously they'll probably never say that, like who they asked. But I mean, to me, I probably think it was more of the owners. I think it's probably just the ownership. And like I said, maybe they probably did ask some players. I'm not sure if they asked everybody. But I'm sure they probably asked like Mookie, Kershaw, the guys that are the stars of this team, right? But yeah, I think it was more, cast in, the whole Guggenheim, trust those guys that are in charge. I think those guys said we don't want him back, and that's how they went.
Yeah. So I mean, look, I hope this is the last time that we really have to talk about Trevor Bauer because, I mean, at this point, it's just beating a dead horse. But it does say, for the most part, I feel like this ownership and this front office have gotten very, they've done the right things and they didn't take that many L's. The Bauer situation seems like it's the first L. And it seems that they clearly don't want to acknowledge it. They just want to move on from it and pretend like it didn't happen. I don't know if Trevor Bauer is going to allow them to do that. I think Trevor Bauer is going to continue to shoot his mouth off, especially if Trevor Bauer doesn't get another job. Because if Trevor Bauer doesn't pitch again, I'm sure we're going to hear more because this is a guy who embraces social media. This is a guy who likes to talk. This is a guy who didn't take the advice. As friend of the Carnesada, Jeremy Evans said, the California sports lawyer, I would have told him, keep your mouth shut and, let's get through this, which is pretty much like what everyone's doing. I haven't heard Mike Clevenger of the White Sox have said anything, and he's under investigation. So it's interesting for me to see that, and now I'm kind of understanding why when we have Dylan Hernandez on from the LA Times to be like, these guys don't say anything and they just want everything on their own terms. And I don't know if that's going to fly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, interesting to see what will happen. Here we are almost a month into Bauer being released and, we'll see what happens. Spring training's right around the corner. So.
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully, I'm glad they did it before spring training because that first day in spring training, that probably the players were going to get asked, everyone was going to be asked, about Bauer. But now, I mean, honestly, I've seen reporters ask players about it. Nobody wants to talk about this. Everybody wants to put this behind us. They want to move on. That's clearly what the ownership wants to do. So maybe this is it. This is finally, it's over. Maybe it could have been handled, much better if they were just honest and been like, look, we did meet with him. There was just no way, in our opinion, unanimously, there's just no way that this was going to work. This was going to be a distraction for the rest of the season, and we felt it was going to impact our season, and our responsibility is to win and focus on baseball. Would that have been a more acceptable answer to you than what we got?
Yeah, even to me, even if they said, you know what, we're not going to comment on it, it's like I'd even kind of take that. It's like we know they're not going to talk about it, right? So it's like I get it and kind of just move on.
And there you have it. So that has been another YouTube short for the Bleed Loves podcast. For those of you who are stumbling and just discovering us for the first time on YouTube, we do these shorts that are exclusive just to our YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. We still do our regular podcast, and you can listen to that on audio format wherever you find your favorite podcasts, or you can watch our episodes on this very same YouTube channel. So basically, the key word here is subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. Follow us on the socials. We have great episodes. This past week, we just had 2 great episodes that we released. We had Benji Gill, the manager of Team Mexico for the World Baseball Classic, give us a preview of Team Mexico. And we also had an interview with Dodgers pitching prospect Gavin Stone. So catch up on those 2 episodes this week. Catch up on past episodes. You'll see them all on our YouTube channel. And get ready for next week, because next week we got another great episode coming your way, and we're going to have probably more YouTube content coming, because the Bleed Lows podcast will be at Dodgers Fan Fest. So you'll hear about our experience there. So, yo ha sido su servidor Juan Ramírez, de parte de mi colega Babyface. This has been the Bleed Lows podcast. Nos vemos.